it requires a renegade spirit to start a business. Logically, it's just dumb to go start a business. Like all the odds are against you. It's not going to pay off for a really long time. If it does at all, the risk is really high. But there's something in a renegade that has to do it, right? The risk of regret is worse than the risk of failure. So they're like, look, we're going to go do this.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Connected Advisor. I'm your host, Kyle Van Pelt, CEO of Milemarker. And today I'm joined by an incredible guest, but also a friend of mine, a local Atlanta native. This is Benj Miller. Benj is a serial entrepreneur. That's how I got to know him, through Atlanta. But the biggest reason why I wanted to have him on the podcast today is Ben is the co-founder and CEO of System and Soul, which is an incredible operating system for entrepreneurs like myself. He's really added some unique flares and changes and enhancements, dare I say, to some of the other systems and operating systems that a lot of us have heard of and may even be using. So I'm really excited for the conversation today. Benj, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Excited to hang out with you and talk all things advisor world.
100%, man. I'm excited to talk about it too. But for those who don't know you, I'm going to start off with a question you probably get a lot, or maybe you don't. For those who aren't looking on video, or if you've never seen Benj before, he has an epic beard. I mean, it is truly incredible. So Benj, tell the world the story behind, like, when did the beard start? And like, is this just part of the brand and persona now, or what's the deal there?
I've only grown a beard twice, so this is the second one. And I have not shaved since before my youngest was born. So he'll be 10 this year, and he's never seen me without it. And every time I go to like, hey, maybe I'll change it up, both of my youngest two kids are like, no, you can't. Like, so they're really the reason. Yeah, there's some kind of brand out there, but I kind of hate that. Like, I don't want to be known for my beard. So every once in a while I get resentful and want to cut it off. But my kids stop me. So if you get to the root of it, I just hated shaving. It irritated my face. And so I just quit.
There you go. That's incredible. It's amazing what we do for our families.
Yeah, for sure.
So Benj, you started this thing called System and Soul. You have an incredible book that just came out recently called Renegades, which I read. I'd love to just ask you, I think, everybody loves this question, but like, how did that get started, man? Like, you were doing all kinds of different stuff. Like, where did Renegades come from? Where did System and Soul come from? Tell the world your story.
Yeah, thanks, man. There's really two totally different stories. So System and Soul came out of, I'd spent years deep in the world of EOS, which I know you're familiar and said a lot of your audiences as well. I brought an implementer into my business. I have a business that'll turn 20 years next month. So big milestone there. Throw back to the milestone word, Milemarker. And we brought an implementer in. It changed my life. It was a game changing for me. Using common language, having an operating system, having that clarity throughout the whole organization, having the cadence of the weekly meetings and the quarterly meetings and all of that. Couldn't believe there was no software, because I immediately rolled it out to several other companies that I owned at the time and needed a place to keep track of it. So that was the impetus of what is now 90.io. That I started with a few co-founders. Along the way, me and one of the co-founders wrote a book in the space around how to have a great clarity break. It's called the Clarity Field Guide. That took us into the largest podcast for companies that ran on EOS, and eventually got the opportunity and the inspiration that the reason EOS was so great for me in my business is because I had learned how to integrate all of these really soulful things into my organization. So I really cared about people. So I learned everything I could about people development, leadership development. How do we engineer the culture we want to have? How do we create an identity for the people, for the collective of our community, which is our company, all these different pieces. And then as I became an implementer of EOS myself, and I'd go into these companies, and there was, to some degree, I had this little sense that I was helping them build really shitty companies. They were growing, they were doing better, but they weren't using that company as leverage for making the world a better place. And so in early 21, me and Chris White, same co-founder that did the software and the book and the podcast, we decided that there was an opportunity and really felt called to lead out on this mission to help create amazing companies where people want to work. And it is the lifeblood of the community, not only from an economic place, but also from a life-giving place. This is the place where people want to work and want to be a part of and want to be affiliated with and want to be a customer of. And that was the beginning of System and Soul. So it's been quite the 3-year journey.
What an incredible journey, man. And I remember kind of laughing. So we have a mutual client, and, I was in the office of this mutual client, and we were talking about some of the things we were doing. And they were telling us, they're like, we just got on this new thing. It's called System and Soul. Our coach is Benj. And I was like, oh my gosh, you guys work with Benj. And I was almost kind of surprised because, of course, RIAs would work with, something like an entrepreneur operating system, but it just didn't click to me. So, and I think you work with more than a handful of RIAs, and you seem to work with a lot of wealth management clients. So talk to us about what you're seeing, in delivering and implementing what you're doing with System and Soul, with RIAs.
Every business wants to feel unique.
Yeah.
Like they're the special little flower. I walk in, it doesn't matter really the size of the business or the industry. The problems are the same, just with the different flavor of the week. That said, RIAs have a few things that I've noticed that are unique to them. And I'd put it in the same category as what happens in physician practices or law practices, in that you've got really, really, really smart people in that business. And the downside of being really, really smart is you think you're really, really smart at everything when you're just really, really smart at being a doctor or being a lawyer or managing money. And so you think that you know everything that applies to building a business, but you've never actually been trained or spent the time learning or even maybe wanted ever to build a business, to be a business builder. So we're going in, and a lot of times we promote people through the ranks. And if you look around your leadership team, this is one of the biggest, I think, places of opportunity, but also current struggle for RIAs, is if you look around the leadership team and most of the people in the room are carrying a book of business, then you don't have a group of people that are dedicated and focused on building the business and taking care of the people and maturing the systems and maturing the technology in the world you're in, right? You've got a reactionary state. You might have the best, smartest people at taking care of customers and managing their money, but you lack the focus and intensity and skill to build the business. And then that's where I see a lot of RIAs kind of get stuck.
I think that's right on. I think I see that in a lot of cases. And I think what I want to ask you about is, okay, you get these people around the table. And I think one of the challenges that not just RIAs, but entrepreneurs as a whole feel or are trying to get better at is, hey, Benj, I've hired these people. I really like them. They're good culture fit, but I just can't seem to get a level of ownership or for them to take ownership over some of this stuff. And that was one of the words you used in that response is like, hey, are these people really taking care of the business? Are they taking ownership over helping build the business? And ownership doesn't always mean equity, right? But it's like, how do you empower people? How do you help get people around the table that really want to feel a sense of ownership over, their piece of the business or whatever it is they're running?
Well, if I just had one single piece of encouragement, if you're building an RIA, it's that, like in those other practices that I mentioned, there's a overvalue on industry knowledge. Whereas what you really need is somebody who has, you need a chief technical officer, right? No matter what industry they come out of, they're going to bring a unique way of thinking about tools and technology and connectivity and communications that you may or may not have. It's just an example. But my encouragement would be, don't necessarily be afraid to look outside your industry to bring in the best talent you need that are business builders. We need business builders, or else we're just going to be stuck kind of plateauing or very linear growth based on individual books of business.
Yeah, very good. You mentioned some of it in your story, but I want to double click on it. Some of the differences between System and Soul and EOS, right? Because, I know some of the core tenets are similar, like, hey, we're going to have these weekly meetings. We're going to have scorecards. These are things that every business should really be doing. Those are, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But from where you sit, and for the people listening to this who might be using something like EOS or Scale Up or, whatever version of an operating system they're using, what are the differences in your view between system and soul and those other ones?
Yeah, I can triple click into this, but the double click is, I think that what we talk about that sums it up best is that there's companies that use their people to grow their business, and there are companies who use their business to grow their people. And we want to work with the latter. We are interested in working with companies who see people not as necessarily, yes, they're the chief asset of the organization, but they're also the chief opportunity to change the world, because that's where people are going to spend so much of their time, so much of their lives. So can we, first of all, make it an awesome place to work, but also how can we pour into them so that they are building the legacy that they can build for their family, for their community? We all go home and coach soccer or t-ball or lacrosse or whatever it is, right? We're out in the community, and we want to create an atmosphere where people can leave energized and take that positive energy back out into the world, not come in, get so drained that by the end of the day, they're out of there. We want to create communities where people feel like they're a part of something greater than themselves. I think this is back to where some RIAs get stuck, is if you're performing with a bunch of individuals with their own individual books of business, then it can create a lot of fiefdoms within the organization. And that may be okay, it may not, but can we tie that to something that we're all trying to do collectively together? So we talk about people development. We have a very different approach to leadership development. We can talk about if you want to. We help engineer the culture we want to have. So start with the end in mind. What do we want this culture to actually be? Lots of people talk about culture, but we don't really know what it means. It's kind of squishy. We have values, blah, blah, blah. We really, like, one of the first things we do is help them define the culture that they want to have, and then build a roadmap to become that when they grow up. The sooner the better, right? How do we get an immense amount of focus on who we are, like from an identity standpoint, and the kind of why we're doing what we're doing, who we're showing up to serve. Like, a lot of people get stuck trying to like find your why, start with why. And I think the best little hack there is to skip that step for a moment and think about, who do you wake up wanting to serve? And some people, it's customers, it's employees, it's shareholders. It's a very, very specific niche customer within their customer segment. Like, once you can identify that shines a light on, why are we doing this? Well, it's to serve that guy or this woman or this team, or save the planet, whatever it is. We're honing in based on somebody, because most of us care about a specific group of people or a person more than we do some cause that's bigger than that.
Yeah, that's insightful, actually. I think for a lot of people listening to this, it's going to be good, because I think, so much of the advice in this industry is like, find a niche, niche down, figure out who it is that you serve, all of that stuff. But is that people making those choices because they think it's a good business choice of, if I go serve doctors, there's plenty of doctors and I can go tell that story, versus is that who you actually want to serve as a person, right? If you could choose to build your business. And I always laugh and think of, there's an example that Michael Kitces, a prominent content creator in our space, is always using, which is like, there's an advisor who works explicitly with professional bass fishermen, right? And it's like, that's all he works with. There's no other clients. And I think that's really good. And I imagine too, so I do want to talk about the leadership development portion. And I imagine if you know who it is that you serve as a company, it probably makes the leadership development a little bit easier, because you become more of a magnet to the type of people that also want to serve those folks from a talent perspective.
Well, that's on the recruiting side. On the leadership development side, it's a little more universal. And big shout out to Tim Spiker, who wrote the book, The Only Leaders Worth Following, and my friend John Ott, who I've worked with in understanding a lot of this. But the research that Tim did in his book and lays out is a pretty convincing argument that 77% of a leader's effectiveness is about who they are when they show up. What's going on inside them? Can they show up to face all of the realities of the day without getting defensive, without being emotionally insecure, without being shook, without having a visceral reaction to what's going on? So the terms that he lays out is inwardly sound and others focused. And that makes up 77% of a leader's effectiveness. Now, there's another 23% that we honestly, most of us talk about often. We've got to cast vision and communicate effectively and think strategically and marshal resources and, make sure we're executing strongly. There's 8 of these kind of other attributes of what leaders do. And that's where we tend to spend most organizations spend most of their time in leadership development, is around these skills that we can learn and level up. When reality is that's only 23%. Even if you max it out and do all 8 perfectly, you're maxing out 23% of your leadership capability. Whereas on the other side, if we spend time with who are we when we show up, who is Benj when he shows up, who is Kyle when he shows up, and is he inwardly sound, and can he be present to be others focused and generous and giving and there and insightful and a coach and a mentor and all of these things. That's if you think about who are the great coaches, mentors, bosses that you've had in your life, and you start listing the attributes of them, the stat would play out. The majority of those attributes would be around who they were as a person more than what they actually did. So that's our whole approach to how we go about leadership development. We're going to skip there'll be bits and pieces of the 23%, but we've got to make sure we focus most of our effort on the 77%. It doesn't matter how well you do that other 23% if you're showing up and you're unsure and insecure as a leader and you're all about yourself and not the people that you're there to serve.
I agree with everything you're saying, but I also think as some of it plays out, right? You show up every day and it's like, sometimes it's just survival mode, right? That almost feels like, what's the cliche? Like everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth kind of thing. And I'm not disagreeing at all with what you say, but it's like, I empathize with all the people out there building businesses. It's like, man, I don't even know what the day is going to bring. Like, I'm just hoping that we're all standing at the end of it, let alone, trying to have a meaningful plan on how to attack it.
So if you're always in that mode, what are you doing to actually get out of that mode? Most of us, whether it's personally or collectively as an organization, organizations are the same, right? They're reactive and whatever. But if we can take time to do the things to mature our person or mature the company, then we're working our way out of that reactive state. We're anticipating what is going to come before it comes, and we're preparing ourselves personally and corporately to handle whatever does come in a more mature fashion.
This podcast is brought to you by Turncast. We make game-changing content for fintech and financial services companies. Learn more at turncast.com.
So I asked you about it before, and we didn't skip over it, but I asked you 2 questions. So we've been talking about system and soul, which is incredible. I think one of the reasons why something like this is so valuable is laid out a bit in your book, Renegade. So I want to hear you talk a little bit about what does it mean to be a renegade, right? Everybody talks about being an entrepreneur, doing all of this stuff, but you sort of have a little bit of a different perspective on that. And I think that's why you wrote this book.
Yeah, the book started because everybody said, well, if you're going to do this and have a system, you have to have a book. And so for like a year and a half, I was like, no. And then I was like, yes. And I started to write it, and I had a draft of it and set it on the table, left it alone over Christmas break, came back, read it to pick up where I was. And I was like, I feel sorry for anybody who has to read this. It wasn't wrong. It just it was unbearable, like just boring. And especially the audience that I really want to resonate with, which are, me 20 years ago, kind of an audience. So I read a few different books, or had a few books that I had read, and they were on my shelf, and just kind of stared at them. And they kind of inspired me to write the book that you see now. There's a lot of myself in that book. It's a lot less of a textbook and more of a story. But the premise of the book is that it requires a renegade spirit to start a business. And as that works, and the only way that businesses get started is because it takes a renegade spirit, because logically it's just dumb to go start a business. Like, all the odds are against you. It's not going to pay off for a really long time. If it does at all, the risk is really high. But there's something in a renegade that has to do it, right? The risk of regret is worse than the risk of failure. So they're like, look, we're going to go do this. And so you've got this renegade energy. And the first stage of any business is what we call the innovation stage. But I also call it the barbarian stage. Like, you've just got to do what you've got to do to figure out what you have to figure out to become what you're going to become. And that requires a lot of moving on the fly. Like, there's just no way to have structure in a business in those early stages. You're really trying to find like product market fit, go-to-market strategy. Those are kind of the 2 big buzzwords that you're trying to figure out right in there, right? But once you do, then you're into this next phase of business, kind of a stage 2, where it's like, okay, now we can grow this thing. Well, to grow the thing, you've got to move out of a barbarian phase. But that's tough for this renegade founder who they're great in that innovation phase. So their wiring wants to stay in that, but the business needs something else. So the whole premise of Renegades is to move from a renegade founder to a renegade leader. So I'm going to say this again: renegade founder, the guy that started the company, and a renegade leader. It's not what the world tells you, which is, okay, become this mature business, go get a nice suit and become a nice, fit in this box and read Harvard Business Review and do all these things perfect. And they're trying to remove the renegade from the founder. And I'm saying, please, 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 the world needs your renegade spirit, your renegade energy. There's some things the business might need to do to grow up, and you might have to do some things to shift from a renegade founder to a renegade leader. But please, please, please don't lose that renegade. And I think that that's where we've hampered some of the entrepreneurial energy that so many great founders have had. And then they've gotten to a place where they've just got frustrated. And then, they either get stuck or they sell, but very few, very, very few keep that renegade spirit and break through to that next level.
That's really well said, man. Because I think that's right. I think everybody, you start getting to a certain place or a certain point where, you start to get the uniqueness of yourself removed from, because you have to, this is what leaders look like, or all of that sort of stuff. And I've seen a lot of people try to fight against that. Like a lot of my friends who got to the places that you're talking about, their business started to succeed and everybody started telling them, this is what you need to look like. This is how you need to act. This is what the leader of a company of this size looks like and feels like and is. And I also think that's one of the beauties of staying private, right? You don't have public markets that you have to, be beholden to, or all of that stuff. You stay private so that you can kind of remain a renegade.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, not even public markets, but like even taking private equity money. The minute you do that, then you're playing their game, and they're going to require that leader to look and function a certain way. And that might not be you. And that's a big risk.
Yeah. No doubt, man. So we've talked like kind of broad strokes about a lot of these things, and I appreciate you sharing what you all are doing and how you think about this stuff. But for the RIAs listening to this, I'm sure they're kind of going, okay, I hear you. Leadership development's important. Figuring out who I want to serve is important. Maybe I'll check out System and Soul. But you do work with a handful of RIAs, and maybe you've touched on some of this, but I wanted to take a minute to kind of explicitly say, what are you seeing? Like for the RIA listening to this, what are a couple practical things you would tell them, to help them kind of make their business a little bit more enjoyable, or to grow, or, whatever it is that they're trying to achieve their goals? Like maybe a mini coaching session for the RIA who's listening to this.
All right. Well, this isn't specific to the RIA, but the place I encourage every business to start is it's got to start with the ownership. And the ownership, whether it's one person or a collective, has to get really, really, really clear on what they want. And most of us have kind of a feeling about what we want, but it's buried deep down a little bit, and we've got to get it up, and then we've got to articulate it. And that's real work. And so the organization will never be able to get you what you want unless you can articulate what that is. And that's on the ownership. From there, we move into the leadership. And the leadership is the body of the team that's going to take that desire of the ownership and put the full weight of their effort into that, to getting that for the ownership. So that's where we get back to who is that leadership. And if you're really trying to go somewhere big or bigger than you are, then you've got to look at who are the people that their only job is building the business, meaning you don't serve clients, you don't have a book of business. Who are the people in your organization that are just there to build the business? It'll actually fall apart, naturally go to chaos and disarray if we don't have people that are actively pushing the clarity and the simplicity back into the system.
How do you transition? Right. I mean, because I'm somebody who I think I empathize with this, that Milemarker's in this really favorable spot. I feel very fortunate and very grateful, but still I'm not an RIA, but I'm doing a lot of client facing stuff. Like I am managing quote unquote a book of business right now. Right. And we're trying to make that. So the people, because I know there's a lot of people listening to this who are in that exact spot. Hey, I've still got a book of clients, but I've now got a handful of advisors that are a part of this, and I have to start turning this into, I have to become from an advisor to a CEO, right? Or whatever that looks like. I mean, how do you make the transition? Do you give up the things that you are working on cold turkey? Do you transition out? Is there a ramp? Like, how do you think about that?
Well, let me maybe reorient something that I may have misspoke. Part of going from a renegade founder to a renegade leader doesn't mean you have to be the guy. You don't have to be the CEO. If your energy is great at, in the RIA world, coming up with very creative solutions for your clients, then put yourself in that seat, because that's the thing that gives you the energy. You might go out and hire a COO or a CEO or somebody that's building the business, because that's the thing that you love. And that's the thing that gives you energy to put back into the world. So hear me that there's not a right answer of, again, what you need to do to get there.
Because some people might dread that, right? They might be sitting there going, I don't want to go sit in management meetings and be looking at spreadsheets and all. Like, I want to be with my clients,
right? Right. And for them, that might be the right answer. But again, I go back to somebody's got to be building the business. So who is that? And to your point, there is a point where it is just a grind. There's a season of the business where you have to grind through it, because the business can't afford the overhead of the leadership. So we're not there yet. So the only way to skip that is to go take investment capital to leapfrog that. Otherwise, my recommendation is just that you invest early and painfully. So you're not going to feel like you can afford it yet. Make the hire. You're investing to get yourself through that season of the business into the other side. And on the other side, there's massive growth opportunities. Again, if that's what you want.
Yeah.
Growth isn't always the goal.
I think that's so interesting, because it is so insightful, and you hear lots of people talk about it. And I think there are so many business owners who really don't stop and answer the question of, what do you want out of this? I think a lot of people stumble into entrepreneurship maybe because they have that renegade spirit, and they just go, hey, like I want to go do it my way, or I want to, and maybe that is what they want out of it. Maybe they're not chasing money, or maybe they're not chasing it, but they just say, hey, I just want control over how the decisions are made, or those types of things. But give me some examples of like things you've seen in the realm of what do you want, right? Because I think you could tick off I want as much money as possible, or I want power, or I want influence, or I want time, or help people. Maybe they're sitting there going, how do I figure out what I want? Do you have any exercises or ideas on how people can get there?
I wrote a whole book on it. It's called The Clarity Field Guide. That is one of the premises in there, is making sure that you take the time to get really, really clear about what you want. We also have a tool, a system in Soul called the Personal Roadmap. So as coaches, we go into organizations and help them build their corporate roadmap. We then teach the whole organization, every single person needs to have their own roadmap. And the real power comes when my personal roadmap intersects the organizational roadmap. We're using each other to get to where we want to go. It's like every great movie has like a buddy. It's the Tommy Boy. They need each other to get what they want. The organization needs me, and I need the organization to get what we want. But I need to know what I want, and the organization needs to know what they want. So a personal roadmap, we've got that as a free tool on our website. We even break down a personal mission statement into like the simplest form to help people get to where they can kind of understand what they're doing here. And it's not a mission like I'm going to make so much money. It's really about your mission. How are you going to show up today? Every day when you show up, what is that mission of how you're showing up? So the personal roadmap is a great way. Clarity Field Guide's a great way. Honestly, just go into the woods with a scrap piece of paper and start writing. I think the hardest part in that is to be honest with yourself. You mentioned money. Financial compensation tends to be the thing that we default to when we can't find the truth. The levels of diminishing return on money are incredible. If you're a halfway decent RIA or advisor, you're going to make plenty of money. So why does that matter? Is it for your kids? Is it for philanthropy, for a ministry? Are you trying to buy time? Is it health focused? Is it an amount of time with your kids? Is it whatever it is? Just get ridiculously honest. Because if you're not honest with yourself, you're going to be playing games with how you get there, and it's going to take you a lot longer.
That is an incredible spot to, I think, kind of wrap up the core conversation. I want to move into something I do with every podcast guest. We call this the Milemarker Minute. So it's just a couple lightning round questions, fun and lighthearted, as a way we wrap up every podcast episode. But I think that last little bit there was really insightful. I love that quote of, if it's money that you're seeking, that's probably because you can't face the truth, I think is roughly what you said, right? Or you can't figure out what the truth is.
I like the way you said it just as well.
Yeah, really well said, man. So Milemarker Minute, the goal here is I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. We want to try and have all of them answered in less than a minute, but I'm not going to hold you to it. But a good way for people to find out more about who you are outside of the business and the work that you do.
Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, Benj Miller, and I also have a daily leadership newsletter. It's the261.com. Just short tips and reminders for all of us.
I love it. All right, let's fire away. You ready for the lightning round?
I thought that was it.
Nope, not letting you off the hook that easy. But
okay.
Good place for them to find you. All right. As we get ready to sit here, March Madness is kicking off. I know you like basketball. Who are you pulling for in your bracket to win the March Madness tournament?
Well, totally biased, but Auburn Tigers.
Auburn Tigers. There you go. Do you think Taylor Swift is good or bad for the world?
I don't have an opinion.
No opinion on Taylor Swift. I love it. What is one place that you have not yet traveled to that you would love to travel to before it's all said and done?
Oh yeah, I want to spend like an extended amount of time in the South Pacific.
Okay, anywhere specific in the South Pacific, or just bounce around?
I want to hit Thailand. Thailand's probably the number one destination, but I want to do some island hopping over there.
Yeah, very cool, man. When you were growing up, or even currently right now, did you have a dream car that you always wanted to drive?
I did for a while. I desperately wanted a Ford Raptor. And when I exited one of my companies, that's what I gifted myself. And I don't have it anymore. I got it out of my system.
You bought it and you got rid of it, huh?
Yeah. But it was fun. I loved it.
I love it. And then my last question is, if you weren't doing what you're doing right now for a career, what do you think that you would be doing instead?
Oh my gosh. I'd still be starting companies, and the 0 to 1 was always really, really fun for me. That was my skill set. But since the starting system in Soul, man, I've been locked in, hyper focused. No more shiny objects for me.
That's amazing, man. Awesome. Well, you got through the Milemarker Minute. Fantastic job. I do hope you get to go to the South Pacific sometime in the relatively near future and do some fun things out there. I've heard nothing but good things about it. But I really appreciate all the wisdom and knowledge you dropped here and for joining the show.
Thanks, man. Always enjoy your energy and whenever we get to hang out.
Yeah, likewise, man. For everybody listening, I know Ben shared some of the places where you can connect with him on LinkedIn or in the newsletter, the 261. But I know a lot of you are EOS users, and I would encourage you to check out what Benj is doing, because it takes a lot of the EOS and the systematic stuff that we've all talked about, but it really does focus on the human element of it. And I think that's tends to be what's missing in a lot of these things. And that's why, I mean, if some of us are honest with ourselves, we get started on something like EOS, but we don't ever fully implement it, or we struggle to get real implementation there. And it probably is the people element. So I would highly encourage you to check out System and Soul, use some of the free resources they have, and follow Benj's content. It's truly incredible. And so that's another episode of The Connected Advisor. Please make sure you subscribe or follow us on whatever platforms you listen to these on, and we'll catch you on the next one.